between one and the other and come up with an answer. Because you're going to deal with a lot of zeros there if you set up this box. You're going to say 9,000 times 100. Then divide it by 12,000. I know a few of my buddies who can get lost in those zeros, am I right? And those zeros will be everywhere. And it's like, okay, wait a minute. Start drawing lines. See where it ends. When you never had to do that. But you do have to think. Not always, as the old saying goes, there's more than one way to skin a cat. You have to know all kinds of ways to do things. And understand it all kinds of ways. Because once you understand it all kinds of ways, then you can solve any problem. Because then you really understand what it means to have 9,000 out of 12,000. It's the same as having 9 out of 12. It's the same as having 3 out of 4. And so you can use that to solve the problem. It's still all 75%. Or 75 out of 100. Okay? Questions? You guys need to practice setting up that ratio and proportion. Practice the word problem so that you know what is the is, what is the part, what is the of, what is the whole, what are they looking for. One thing to leave you with, if the question says, they took 30% off of an item, and the question says, how much did he pay for it? It says at a sale, was at a sale for 30% off. And the question is, how much did you pay? How will you go about setting that up and solving it? What do you need to know to figure out the cost?
How much it was to begin with? The full price, the original price?
Well, if I told you the price, it costs $1,400, they're taking 30% off, how much will you pay? How are you going to set that problem up?
Is that zero or no? Oh, okay. As a proportion, you mean?
I just want to know what thought process are you going to use to solve that problem?
Take 10% off.
Take 10% off and then
And then
multiply it by 3 and then what? Is that your answer?
Subtract it from the whole.
You see? Because they said 30% off, how much will you pay? They didn't ask you how much is 30% off. You see? You gotta watch what the question is. I can find 30% off, like she said, find 10%, multiply times 3, 420, but is 420 the answer? It costs $1,400, they're taking 30% off, you're gonna pay $420 for that? That would be one of the answer choices. Because some folks would do the math, come up with 420 and figure, okay, that's my answer. Because you weren't thinking through it. They're taking 30% off. You're not paying 30%. You gotta then take this off of the $1,400 to decide how much you're gonna pay. Or you could figure out what, Griselda?
Huh?
If they're gonna take 30% off and they wanna know how much are you gonna pay, what percent are you going to pay if they're gonna take 30% off?
70?
70%. That's what I want to leave you with. You have to figure out everything they give you is not what you're going to use necessarily to figure out your answer. You need to know that to figure it out. But if they say they're going to take 30% off, but they ask me how much am I going to pay, I'm going to pay 70%. So I need to know what is 70% of $1,400 if I need to know what I'm going to pay, you see? Otherwise, you're going to do a two-step problem. You're going to figure out how much they're going to take off, which is the 30%, then you have to take it off. But people sometimes forget to take it off. And so, always figure out what they've given you, but what they ask. And how can you do a problem that your answer is the answer to the question? There was a question on one of the practice tests that said there were 9,000 cattle or 10,000 cattle, and they had a bad winter, and 10% of them died. How many lived? And everybody figured the 10%, and they put 1,000. But then if you ask yourself that question I said at the end, does your answer make sense? If there were 10,000 cattle and only 10% died, you're going to have more than just 1,000 living. You see? Again, it's not just about the numbers. You got to ask yourself, does it make sense?
So right there, all you would do is multiply 420 from 1,400? Or from
Subtract 420 from 1,400? Yeah. And that would be what you pay.
Okay.
Or I could have said, so that's how much you're gonna pay, right? I could have found out 90%, which would be still the 10%, but now times 9, right? To find 90, oh, what wasn't 90%?
Yeah,
70%. It's still 10%, but now just times 7. Could have found that 980 in one step instead of 2. Yes, Jim.
How did you come up with 70%?
Because if they took 30% off, how much is the whole thing?
100%.
The whole of anything is how much? In percent. The whole of anything is what? Don't think too hard. The whole of anything is how much percent? If you are there every day, you have what kind of attendance?
100%.
100. Percent is always 100. The
Okay.
whole is 100.
Okay.
And that's what you have to know and remember. The whole is always 100. If they take off 30, you're going to pay 70 because the whole is 100.
Okay.
If they take off 40, you're going to pay
60.
60. If they take off 50, you're going to pay?
50.
They take off 10, you're going to pay?
90.
Okay, you got it. Have a good evening.